right, my friends, here we are once again with Maxwell Mooney, a person I've known for a long time now. We have crossed paths in various ways, and I'm really excited to have him on the podcast. He, like me, is someone who has dipped his toes in myriads of worlds, but has this core of hospitality, has this core of kindness, is a risk taker, an entrepreneur. We have a lot to learn from him today. Welcome, Maxwell, to the Tyler Hill podcast.
Dude, thank you so much for having me, man. That's a very gracious intro that I don't know if I'm necessarily deserving of, but I appreciate it.
Hey,
And
man.
thank you for welcoming me into your space.
Yeah, you're welcome, bro. Yeah, I was thinking about the first time I think I ever met you. I don't know if it was before or after a coffee competition, but I think you might have just presented and you were sitting on a bench, or we were sitting in like bleachers, and I just sat next to you and introduced myself to you, and I was just like a young buck, and you were like, I think you were just like on the come down after a giant
That makes so
presentation.
much sense.
And I was like trying to like do small talk, and you were just like, on this come
Oh,
down, and probably like, who the heck is this kid talking to me right now? Um, but anyways, we'll talk about coffee
I'm
and stuff.
sorry. I'm sorry. That was our first
Oh,
introduction.
it's not your fault.
I'm definitely not at my best moments on the come down from a competition specifically. I'm like entirely zoned out and just like sometimes I'm beating myself. Often I'm beating myself up. And so that's usually like me at my worst. So I'm sorry that that's how we met, but I'm grateful that you've stuck it out.
Oh, bro, I love it. So let's start here, bro. Before we talk about work, before we talk about all the things we do and believe and how we live,
Okay.
we are just humans and we have fun, and there are things that make us come alive. Maxwell, if you had a couple $100, you had a weekend free to yourself, what are you doing when the world is your oyster and you can just engage in life freely and fully? What makes you come alive just as a person behind the scenes?
Oh man. Right now, at this exact moment, I would probably go on a barbecue tour through Texas, or I would go fly fishing somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, or go on a whitewater trip. So one of those three things.
Love that. What are you a barbecue connoisseur? Is it something you're just getting into? Is it something you've always been into?
I've not always been into it. My wife and kids got me a pellet smoker for Father's Day, like maybe 3 years ago, something like that. And it was 2022. So yeah, a little over 3 years ago. And I jumped down jumped down the rabbit hole, and really like started trying to learn the ropes. And it's become a hobby for me in the way that coffee was a hobby
Hmm.
um, prior to getting into it. I was just like, man, I really enjoy this, and I enjoy taking something that is often considered a like offcut and something that's tough and tender and just requires a lot of care and patience and effort to sort of like make the beautiful come out of it. But then when you do that, it is just the most incredible taste experience that you can possibly have.
Hmm.
And so there are so many parallels to coffee with barbecue that just really excite me, and I
Yeah.
just really appreciate. And so I've fallen down that rabbit hole. I've since gotten into like a stick burner for all the barbecue purists out there. I smoke over oak or maple, or I live in Virginia, so I don't have post oak like most of the Texas boys do, but and gals. There's a lot of excellent female pitmasters out there, but so that's usually what I do. And I've cooked every kind of protein now. I think the only thing that I haven't still smoked yet is cheese, but
Mm.
everything else I've done. And I have some cheese that I'm waiting to smoke. So,
Fun.
uh, but I feel like my barbecue game is almost as good as my coffee game now, which I
Wow.
would not, I would not say that unless I felt decent about it. So I'm feeling
That's
pretty good about
awesome.
it.
So you mentioned this sort of like posture, like the enjoyment you have of taking something and nurturing it to the greatest potential that can come out of it. So, when we used to go crazy over coffee, we would take a coffee and we would we would tinker with the recipes, and we would add, half a gram of this more coffee, or we would change the water, the minerals in the water. We would do all this crazy stuff
Yeah.
to bring out the best in it. And in smoking meat or cheese, you long and steady, and you maintain temperature, and there's all this nuance trying to bring the potential out of something. Has that always been in you? Like, where did that passion of bringing the best or the most out of something come from? Like, how did this sort of idea come alive in your story?
Mm, what a great question. I can't ever recall anybody asking me that before.
Mm,
I don't know if it's always been there. I've always had an interest in doing things well, and I've always been intrigued by craft. One of my other long-standing sort of things that I love is music, and I play lots of instruments and stuff. And one of the things I love about music is that and I know I do notice this among a lot of the things that most excite me. They engage multiple parts of my humanity. What I love about music and coffee and barbecue is that it's both a craft, which is something that has a level of objectivity to it. That's like you can increase your skill in this particular area. You can gain mastery over new techniques and new ways of doing things, but it's always in service of an expression,
mm,
of a communication of your sort of take on something, or the way that you feel about a given topic, where you can communicate how you feel about the world or this particular item. And I love things that allow me to sort of express my own version of
mhm,
this thing. And I think that that's probably the commonality that
mm.
maybe ties most of my interests together. Whenever I think about it, it's like something that I can see measurable progress in. I can see, myself being better at it tomorrow than I am today,
Mhm.
and better today than I was yesterday at it. But it also allows me a chance to sort of offer something to the world, and something that can hopefully serve people and like brings joy to people. I
Mhm.
think those are the things about it that are like most common. It's
Yeah.
like all of those together, you know. So I don't know when that particular thing sparked. I've always had a love of music ever
Mhm.
since I was a kid. Like there's a photo that my dad has of me. He had my dad. We do not share taste in almost anything, but he has pretty good taste in music. And Dad, if you're listening to this, thanks for all the music. But he had this system, a stereo system back in the 90s. It
Mhm.
was like a pretty nice one, like Techniques, with the whole like rack system, and he had the full equalizers and all that stuff. But he was playing Metallica's Black album, and he has a photo of me dancing along with the music, just like Enter Sandman going or whatever. And I think like ever since then, I've always loved music. When I was five, my favorite artist was Ozzy, and I just
Mhm.
like have always had this sort of like interest in music. And then, like so many of us, when I became a teenager, music was incredibly formative for me,
Mhm.
and just where I found a lot of solace in people who understood the feelings that I was having and could express it in a way, and I've always really, really resonated with like intentionally expressive music. Like emo in particular, it's just always been something that, not always. The first time I heard it, I was just like, that is for me. Like that just it captures this thing. The first time I heard like Ohio is for Lovers,
Mhm.
just like that visceral screaming. I was just like, that does something for me. That even some of this other music, I've always liked rock music, but it's just like that really gets to this thing that I feel that you know, I don't always have other safe avenues to express. So
Mhm.
um, I think that those are the commonalities there, and I think that just the ability to serve people through this medium, through coffee or through barbecue or whatever, like those all tap into that same sort of feeling that I get with music. So
Yeah, it's almost like a thread I heard you pull out there, Maxwell, was that you have this passion to do things with excellence, but that at some point it spills over into serving or helping others. And I think sometimes, like, even if you think about, Metallica or Ozzy Osbourne or something, like the people that are at the pinnacle of their craft,
yeah,
you know you could almost perceive it as, oh, all I do is practice my own stuff. I just work on me, to become excellent. And it almost can seem like an inward conquest. And yet, what you're really describing is if I can see the world as there's always a next step for me to get better, there's something for me to grow. It actually isn't just about you, it spills out into the world around you. When we get excellent at coffee or music, none of these bands we love are what they are if they didn't go on their own internal conquest of trying to be the best version of themselves. The ways in which we tend to our own giftings and passions really does help the world if we steward it well.
Yeah. When I think too, what one thing that for all of its flaws and for all of the frustration that it causes, what one thing that I do really appreciate about the way that the capitalist system works is that if people truly find value in something, they can support it.
Mhm.
It and what I think is cool about all those bands and all the coffee and the barbecue is that when other people find value in it and they see how cool it is and they are served by what you're producing and creating in the world,
Mhm.
it actually helps create a sustainable thing for the people involved
Mhm.
most times, or sometimes, maybe sometimes is a better definition.
Yeah.
And obviously I think we both probably have an appreciation of niche enough art where there's not a huge market for it.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, there are a decent number of bands I know that can make a living making screamy music that
Yes.
doesn't serve most people, but serves enough people. That's what I
Yes. So let's dive in there. I was saving this for later, but since we're already here, let's talk about hospitality. Let's enter into that. We have these passions, we have these things we care about, and then it ends up serving others, whether that happens in a business, but we know hospitality obviously transcends our entrepreneurial endeavors.
Oh yeah,
Um, Let us in a little bit to your philosophy of hospitality, how that has just impacted your life and your worldview. I'm just gonna say that and let you go.
okay.
Hospitality.
Man, as you know, this is one of the most formative and important things in my life, and something I think about probably more than I should. Um, Hospitality to me, I find a lot of value, and I know I'm talking to someone who works in a church, so this is not going to be uh, foreign to you, but I find a lot of value in understanding the roots of words and how that the root can sort of illuminate the maybe your current understanding. And the word hospitality comes from the Latin word hostis, which meant stranger or enemy, and it's the same common root of a ton of words in the English language. Uh, Words as disparate as to be hostile, right, or hostel, a place that you stay when you're a stranger. It's the same root for hotel and motel and hospitality, also, of course, but hospitals, where you go and receive care for someone. It's the root word of the word host, to host someone and welcome them into your home, or the host at a restaurant. It's the That root shows up in so many ways. And so for me, I've adopted the definition of hospitality that is the art of transforming strangers and enemies into friends. And so to me, hospitality is more than just welcoming people in, though historically that's what it's been. It's been welcoming in strangers, giving them a place to stay, offering them food and respite and care. And hospitality, one thing that I really love about it is that it exists in every single culture, whether they're connected or not. It is pervasive in essentially every culture that you ever look at throughout history. And so it's this recognition that we are all strangers to someone, and that care that we can offer a stranger is care for the stranger that we've been oftentimes. And to me, that kind of getting into some of the spiritual underlying for me here is when I look at um, the gospel. And I'm not sure who's all listening to your podcast. I don't know if it's mostly Christians
Feel
or
free to
not.
be yourself.
Yeah, for
Be
sure.
you.
Um, for whoever's listening who may not be familiar with it, um, one of the core tenets of Christianity that's maybe different than many other kind of worldviews is a love for strangers and enemies. Um, And Romans says like while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And when I look at the gospel and I look at the cross, I see love for those who have been made enemies and dying on their behalf. And that is the ultimate act of hospitality. And in creation, in creating a place where we're meant to dwell together, God establishes an act of hospitality for us. So creation itself is an act of hospitality. And I think that like this is really, really illustrated all throughout the life of Jesus, and it's really under talked about. There are not enough commentaries that focus on the threads of hospitality throughout the New Testament, but especially in the book of John, which has a chiastic structure. And the three major points of the chiasm are the opening, the closing, and then the central sort of like tenet. If you're not familiar with chiasm, it's a Greek sort of literature, Greek ancient Near East literary device, kind of the way that most Westerners, the way that we tell stories is it has kind of a setting place, and then there's sort of small conflicts along the way, and then we get to sort of like the big climax at the end of the story before like resolution. And a chiasm is a little bit different and shaped like an X, well, one half of an X, and but the central point of the story usually is right in the middle, and it's sort of like mirrored by things on either side. And so the central sort of structure of John's gospel is that of hospitality. It's actually Jesus breaking bread with the disciples.
Mm-hmm.
That's this sort of like central section. And the first thing that he does in his gospel is convert water into wine at a wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And so what happens there is not just that's not just his miracle of like hosting or not just taking care of this thing that happened, but he actually becomes the host. There's like a hidden conversion in there where
Mm-hmm.
Jesus doesn't just convert water into wine, but he converts into the host in a way that I think a lot of people miss. And I'm really grateful that the pastor that I grew up with, he did his dissertation on that particular topic. And so it's not like this is something that I just like came up with. I just happen to have been rubbing shoulders with people who have thought about this even more than I have. But what my favorite thing that happens is at the end of John's gospel, where the disciples feel like all is lost and that the God who they had put all their trust in died.
Mm-hmm.
And they're like trying to figure out what the heck to do. And so they just go out fishing because they don't know what else to do. And they're out fishing overnight and they catch absolutely nothing. And Jesus comes in his resurrected self and calls out to them on their boat and just says, "Hey, throw your nets out on the other side."
Mm-hmm.
And so they do, and they catch a ton of fish, and they come in, and they're like, "What? What's going on?" And what I think is the most important moment here is that Jesus does something that is the most deeply human and deeply hospitality oriented thing that you can do. As his final act, he makes breakfast for his
Mm-hmm.
disciples.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to me, like, I just find so much value in seeing those actions of like, I care about you and I want to make you something.
Mm-hmm.
Like I want to make sustenance for you and I want to welcome you in. And I just see that all throughout the scriptures. And so for me, that's really where like a lot of the core comes from. Now, I I believe hospitality is something for everybody, and you don't have to be a Christian to practice hospitality. And you know, depending on who you are out there, like word. But for me, that's like the really deep underpinning philosophy for why I care about it as much as I do.
Mm-hmm.
Because to me, it's that, and that's honestly, that's the like ideological underpinning, and then there's a really deep practical underpinning for my life that has also made me care about this at a level that nothing else really could. And that's that when I was a kid, I had a really challenging childhood. I moved 23 times before I graduated high school.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time that I was 16, I was pretty fed up with it. And I had a chance to get a scholarship at the school that I was at that was funded by the College Success Foundation, which is funded by Bill and Melinda Gates and the founder of Costco, Jim Senegal. And it was my chance to get to college, basically. And my dad, he continued to move, and I decided that I was done moving.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up being welcomed in. There was a lot that happened, but I ended up being welcomed into the home of like my youth pastor, who became like one of my closest friends. His parents welcomed me in because he was like 20 at the time. His parents welcomed me in and basically took care of me and treated me as their son for the last 2 years of high school for me. And we still are close today. We go and visit for holidays. They're up in Alaska now, and so I just experienced hospitality at a level that I did not deserve. I was not owed. It was no, it was just out of an overflow of their love for me and deep compassion that I got to experience that. So
Yeah. I love that.
how else can I
Yeah,
live
totally.
than to try to like share what I have, you know? So that's been that's like for me where hospitality really comes from. It's like two part, the like brain and then just the body.
Yeah. One of my favorite parts of that John story also is how like in the text you they make it makes it really clear that the charcoal fire that Peter denied Jesus around on the last one, the same word is used for the charcoal fire that Jesus uses to make that last breakfast.
Yep.
And I just love that echoing of like, listen, you're not the worst thing you did. Like, in fact, I'm gonna kind of remind you, like, this is gonna smell the same. It's a charcoal fire. Like, it's gonna feel it, but we're gonna redeem that.
Yeah.
And just even the nuances of almost like, if we want to get really nerdy, his guest experience, like this is gonna look and feel and smell the same, and I'm gonna welcome you into this new
Yeah.
experience to redeem that old one.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh, yeah. John is the best. I love that book. Okay, so there's this spirituality of hospitality, welcoming the stranger and making them a friend. You were a stranger, these folks welcomed you in and gave you some stability for the last few years of high school, and it transformed you. Hospitality is transformative. Could you help distill it down for us and say, like, how has hospitality kind of practically impacted your life, say as a dad or as a business owner in your marriage, perhaps? Like what does this look like on a practical level, say for the people who don't own restaurants or coffee shops? What does hospitality? How does it manifest in other ways in our life? Kind of on a practical level, if somebody says, yeah, hospitality does sound awesome. We live in a society that is incredibly inhospitable right now. Um, how can we change that? How can we make this manifest in our life?
Yeah. Man, what a great question. So one of the sort of outworkings of my definition of hospitality is that it's more than just welcoming people into your house, right? It's an art of transforming strangers and enemies. And the way that that looks practically in the world today, that feels more divided and more hostile to one another than it has in my lifetime, at the very least. But I think in a lot of people's lifetimes, is that it seasons much of my way of being in the world with as much grace as I can hope to give.
Mm,
Of like, not everybody's going to view things the same politically, philosophically, um, life choice wise. Like everyone is going to have a different sort of perspective on things, but trying to navigate that complex reality with as much grace and gentleness as possible to me looks like everyday practice of hospitality, of maintaining friendships across ideological lines that for a lot of people is entirely uncomfortable and or unacceptable. It's like I have deep friendships with people who are anarchists and people who are uh, like activists and artists, and I have deep friendships with police officers and firefighters and like conservative farmers. And it's like I've got friendships sort of spread across the ideological spectrum,
mm,
and for a lot of people that's anathema, but to me that's an example of trying to hold to this thing of loving everyone as much as I can and practicing hospitality. And so, and it also gives, man, I it's really common for me to feel like I'm taking arrows from both sides, because I get caught in the crossfire. It feels like a lot
mm,
of these cultural sort of conversations, and a lot of times I'm like the only touch point that someone will have with someone on the opposite side of the spectrum. But to them, I'm like between them, And so I find myself having the same conversations with, in terms of like, hey, that's not that's a caricature of this person or this idea,
Hmm.
and you're you're not actually being fair, and you're sort of like assuming the worst of this person. But in reality, you guys are kind of the same. You just both want to like live your life, love the people that you care about, be good, you know, and not struggle. And you're both after the same thing. You just start trying to get there through different means. And like, but I find myself having that same conversation with people on both sides of the spectrum a lot. And
Hmm.
so to me, like that's a really practical way that hospitality can be lived out. Then there's some really boots on the ground types of things of just like invite friends over for dinner. And this is something I'm not as good at as I'd like to be fully transparent. Because like I would like to have people over for dinner more often. But I struggle with the same pressures and realities of all the rest of American life. Um, but inviting people over for dinner and or inviting people out for coffee or having those moments, those are all great moments to practice hospitality, and just connecting with people and choosing to care about someone even if you disagree with them, and just caring about that
Yeah.
makes a big difference in the world.
How can you maintain relationships with people across ideological lines? I mean, I deeply relate with feeling like you're in the middle of that crossfire and me owning and running bars and coffee shops and being in spiritual spaces and even spiritually for me, like I find myself in pretty expansive and progressive spiritual spaces while also inhabiting more kind of traditional ones, especially because of my upbringing. In a world where that feels impossible, how would you coach someone to maintain a relationship with people on both sides of these political or spiritual or ethical sort of dichotomies? Because some would say, right, like that's like you're siding with oppressors or you're not being kind to like a silence is violence type, situation. What would your advice be to someone who is truly trying to be hospitable to all of the people in their atmosphere?
Yeah. So um, there's this little piece of advice that Paul gives to Timothy, where he says, "Insofar as it relies upon you, live at peace with everyone." And to me, that little "insofar as it relies on you" bit has been such a freeing gift. It's just like, you know what? At the end of the day, I can't make everybody like me. I can't make everybody be at peace with me, and I can't make everybody want to be friends with me.
Mm-hmm.
That's just the reality. And while that's the case, I can choose to view everyone else as friends, and I can choose to view them in a way that respects that, even if we have different perspectives on the world, that I still like them, I still care about them, and I want the best for them. So I think, one, if you even care about hospitality in this way and you're willing to say like, yeah, actually this is something that I want to see in the world, that's a great first step, of just like,
Mm-hmm.
this actually matters to me. Like building bridges not for the sake of accepting or acquiescing to oppression, but to help people see the reality of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
My One of my biggest sort of heroes is Daryl Davis. Daryl is, if you're not familiar with his story, he's a blues musician, and he's a really incredible pianist. And it's played in bars all over or whatever. And when he was 10 years old, he had his first encounter with racism. He's a black man, and he his dad he took this situation to his dad, and his dad was like, "Oh, son, sorry to tell you, but that was a racist experience. Like that person was being racist." And Daryl was left with this question, which is how can you hate me even though you don't know me? And that just question just burned within him for years, and just kind of put it in his back pocket. And years later, Daryl found himself playing in a bar in Maryland, and it was a bar full of white folk. And he was playing, killed his set, came down and sitting at the bar, and a fellow came up to him and said, "Man, you are the best piano player I've seen besides Jerry Lee Lewis. I didn't even think black people could play that good. And he's like, my friend, like Jerry Lee Lewis learned from black people. Like I know who he learned from. And he came to find out through having this conversation with this man that he was part of the KKK, and that um, he had just sort of adopted this mentality about the world. And Daryl, instead of reacting reflexively in a pushback position, like acting defensively, Daryl said, "Well, oh, that's interesting. Like, why do you think that?" And he found that this fella had been told that black folks were less intelligent than he was, and Daryl was like, "Well, I mean, we're talking. Do you think I'm stupid?" And he's like, "No, you seem pretty smart." Like, yeah, most people say I'm decently intelligent.
Mm-hmm.
And then he, heard that black people are violent, and everyone in his circle of influence told him that black people were violent. And he's like, "Well, do I look violent? Am I attacking you right now?" Like, "Well, no, you don't seem to be violent." Like, yeah, normal person. And through relationship and through this person learning who Daryl was, this encounter, this connection allowed that man to see that the worldview that he had been fed was too small to fit the real world.
Mm-hmm.
It made sense and was logical in this context, but it didn't fit the real world. Chesterton has one of my favorite quotes where he says that madmen are not illogical. Their logic is perfectly coherent. It's just not big enough to fit the real world.
Mm-hmm.
And worldviews are like that.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of a question that we all have to ask ourselves when we look at how we view the world: is this understanding of reality, is this map of reality big enough to make space for the totality of the experiences that people are having,
Mm-hmm.
right? And this fella had a very small view of the world that did not make space enough for all of the experiences out there. But he did not have a chance to encounter a moment that cracked his worldview, that
Yeah.
sort of made him say, that doesn't make sense now.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've been fed this and that made sense to me until I've had this experience where I got to connect with this guy, and he proved it wrong. Like,
Yeah.
he's a good guy.
Uh-huh.
And what's crazy is that Daryl ended up, I mean, he's still doing it now. He's still alive, still kicking. I really would love to meet this man someday. But he has been accredited with 226 deconversions from the KKK,
Mm-hmm.
including some Grand Wizards, to the point where if you've been an adult for a little while, you may remember that there was a shooting in Charlottesville back in 2018, and at that shooting, a Grand Wizard of the KKK was arrested for a hate crime and for shooting someone. Daryl posted this man's bail and went and got him out of jail. Someone who was responsible for killing folks and was an extremist. And he got him out of jail, had some conversations with him, just talked to him, just spent time understanding how he came to view the world the way that he did, and just listened, offered some insight whenever there were moments where it was like, that doesn't seem to make sense. Like, what about me? Like, what would you say to this moment? And um, Daryl ended up walking his daughter down the aisle when she got married.
Mm-hmm.
That level of compassion and connection only happened because Daryl was willing to enter into the world of someone who thought so differently from him that he was willing to navigate those complexities in a way that almost nobody else ever seems to be willing to.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that everyone should go put themselves potentially in harm's way in order to talk someone down, but my point in sharing that is that humans we all have the same core desires: to be loved, to be known, to be cared for, to have someone encounter us in the wilderness, right? Those moments of hospitality. And I think, based on the experiences that I've had, my map of the world is
Mm-hmm.
that is a much better way to make progress in the world than a sort of defensive,
Yes.
violent reaction against others. And so when I encounter someone who says things like silence is violence and I'm siding with oppressors by doing this, I understand. I
Yes.
understand that that's the map of the world that they have developed, and I understand that that's in a lot of ways built on a series of experiences that they've had that help them lead to adopting that worldview.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I recognize within my own understanding that by breaking people down into only two classes of people, either oppressed or oppressors, using the sort of Hegelian dialectic philosophy there, they're they accidentally or maybe intentionally, but in my estimation, most likely accidentally, they dehumanize people
Yes.
in that action and or in that worldview into those who are oppressors and those who are oppressed, and that oppressed group is the only people who are human and deserving of human affection and love, and that the oppressor group that they determine that are not. And in doing that, that's not something that I can accept. I cannot adopt that. I cannot
Sure.
agree with that. However, I am not willing to write this person off because they view other people that way. Because for me, I understand. I understand the pain that has led them to getting here, and I understand that that's a very human reaction and a very human response to
Mhm.
adopt that of like, this thing causes me pain, so I'm going to defend against it and
Yes.
try to reduce that pain. And so to me, that makes perfect sense. I totally understand that. However, I cannot accept it for me.
Yeah.
And so it's one of those things where I don't have to agree with you for me to care about you and love you.
Yes.
And for me, that's a worthwhile endeavor. That's something that's worth doing because other people have loved and cared about me, even if they don't agree with me on
Hmm.
things. And
Yeah.
to me, that's a much more meaningful way of living in the
Yes.
world.
Yeah. And so good, bro. That's so good. Um, I need to pause just one quick second.
No problem.
My kids, just 1 second. I'll
No
splice
problem.
this up.
Yeah.
We're back.
All right.
Paw Patrol was in the background just a little bit.
Oh yeah, dude.
Um,
Jason Sky.
that's right. You sharing that story about that experience at the bar, it makes me think about like I often say, Maxwell, how my one of the best gifts God ever gave me was making me a bartender. Um, I had spent so much of my life in the like very conservative Christian bubble, all the way from, all the way up through college. And I had actually been traveling the world. I would speak at like conferences and churches all over the world, and that season of my life had ended. And I was trying to figure out what I was going to do, and there was a coffee roaster at this little place in Colorado Springs, and this was before kind of the specialty coffee boom. And he said, "Hey, we're opening up this thing. Do you want to go be a bartender? And it's going to be a coffee shop and a bar." And I was like, "Sure, I'll go do that." But at that point, I had never even had alcohol in my life yet,
Wow. Wow.
and and uh,
You
and
kind
so
of
then
like
I end up going,
that
helping this
sort of
guy open this bar, and and just the way in which it expanded my world was just like all these people I was taught that is my enemy. You know, I can like one of the most like truly one of the most transformative things ever was there was this lesbian couple. They had been dating since middle school, and they were both in their like 70s, and they would both give me kisses on the cheek, and I was just like, it just you can't unlearn that. Like it just like these gentle kisses, it just changes everything, right? And then politically, and then it's like, I can remember the first time I started working Sundays when I wasn't at church, and I was like, this is kind of fun. Like these people I hear, it's not some like just chaotic, hellscape out here. Like it's kind of brunch. Sunday brunch is pretty cool. But the point being is that like I had just never been out of the bubble.
yeah,
And so of course I saw things a particular way.
yeah,
And to just serve these folks who were just so different than me, I couldn't help but love them. And it changed my whole life. And I would not be anywhere near I am if it wasn't for the bar. And it kind of similarly into that story that you shared. Maxwell, thank you so much for sharing that. I really I really appreciate that perspective. Um, Practically here, we'll get down to kind of the nitty gritty here. Like a lot of, I do this podcast kind of covers the spectrum, and we talk about spirituality, but we also talk about, I love talking about people chasing their dreams and becoming their best selves. And um, what role, like, you've started businesses, you help people succeed and thrive in their businesses, and we'll talk about risk taking and entrepreneurship here in a second, but what role does hospitality play in, say, people achieving their dreams, in having successful businesses? And, like, could you just give some more practical insight? Because I think everybody likes to think their business is hospitable, that the restaurant practices great hospitality. In your, like, expertise as a consultant and as a practitioner over many years, um, how does somebody actually deploy hospitality on a practical level when it, say, comes to their online business or their restaurant, that type of thing? How does this translate to, like, the success of dream chasing, entrepreneurship, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, that's such a great question. And honestly, this is one of the areas where I struggle a little bit because the honest truth, if those of us who are interested in practicing hospitality and also business owners, there there is not a way to practice true hospitality in a business detached from the money aspect of it, right? When money changes hands, it in my opinion, it loses some of the genuine hospitality. However,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean we can't get close to it and get as close to it as possible. And I think that that starts with the intention of transforming strangers and enemies into friends, right? And when you view this is a common situation that happens, particularly amongst business owners, but more their staff. But whenever you view someone as just a number, a transaction, as uh, dollars in your bank account, and I'm not saying don't track numbers because you have to. But what I'm saying is you have to view them as more than that. That they
Mhm.
are a human. That they're a someone with their own story and their own background. When you view them as just being this transaction thing, you start losing little bits and pieces of it, and there are lots of different definitions out there. But Danny Meyer kind of uses one where he talks about service is the things that you do, and hospitality is the way that you make people feel.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that's true. But at the end of the day, the if you just view things as a service, the service will start to slip too, because you view people as sort of owing you money for providing this service. Um, and that is one of the more telling challenges that the businesses run into. And one of the things that gets very difficult to diagnose from a culture standpoint
Mhm.
is that, like you're coming to me, like I don't owe you anything. And it kind of creates this animosity where like the staff and the guests start to feel almost opposed. It almost feels enemy oriented,
Mhm.
or there's some hostility in there, and that's an inversion of it. And I would say that I experienced that a lot more since the pandemic.
Mhm.
Where that's not. I think we're starting to see some correction on it, but I still experience a lot of that where it's just like, oh, like I don't want to talk to you. I'm not going to say hello. All those sorts of things, and I really, and I think this is exacerbated by economic realities, right? And that whenever I push on this, I will frequently hear pushback from people that's like, well, I'm not paid enough to care about
Mhm.
that.
Mhm.
And what I think, I understand the feeling of economic pressure. I've been a barista for most of my life. Like,
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
get it. I freaking get it.
Mhm.
However, what I hear in that, and what I think that people don't realize by saying that, is that the only people who are deserving of care, the only people who are deserving of attention and appreciation in a genuine moment are the rich,
Mhm.
because they're the only ones who can afford to have a human moment. And I
Mhm.
think that's a disturbing and just frankly a disgusting world that I do not want to build. I do
Mhm.
not want to build a world where the only time that I'm willing to give out human care is when you pay me enough money.
Mhm.
That is not the world that I want to live in, and it's definitely not the world that I want to build. And I think that there's a lot of people in the world who agree with me. It's like
Mm-hmm.
you can always think of like Mother Teresa's, or like the lady who's been serving at the Waffle House for 60 years
Mm-hmm.
and just welcomes you in and makes you feel cared about.
Mm-hmm.
Like those folks exist in the world, and they're the people that I want to build the world alongside.
Yep.
But I understand that feeling of like economic pressure making people feel stressed and
Mm-hmm.
like things difficult. So that's one big thing. There's some real practical ways that you can start to improve hospitality in your space and your business if you do run that, and that's something that you want to move toward. One of the biggest ones is there's something that I talk with all my clients about, all my staff, anyone who's ever like chatted with me for any period of time, they will hear this at some point because I found it to be the most helpful little heuristic to get through the world, and particularly to manage conflict. But it's that unmet expectations is the source of all conflict.
Mm-hmm.
I used to think that it was that unmet expectations were the source of some conflict or most conflict, but I think now that it's all conflict. And um, there are lots of ways to think about navigating sort of conflict, but I'm always looking for the expectations that have not been met. Now, there's a reality there where sometimes expectations that have been broken aren't even they're not communicated, and sometimes they're we can't even vocalize them. Like
Mm-hmm.
this happens with humans sometimes when we experience cognitive dissonance, which is kind of a psychological phenomena that where you view yourself as wanting to be one way or think one way or do one thing, and then you do the opposite thing, and you sort of become a hypocrite. That's like the pejorative term that we attach there. But sometimes we can feel that within ourselves when we don't live up to our own expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and it's that expectation that we don't live up to.
Mm-hmm.
This happens with um, all sorts of situations with jobs, work, all sorts of things, right? Where an expectation exists and is not met, we experience conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Now, for an expectation to be reason or for an expectation to be met, one, it has to be communicated. Like we have to know that the expectation is there, right? And how often do we run into those expectations within ourselves that we don't even recognize we had,
Mm-hmm.
right? Until we broke it. We're like, oh, that felt bad. Why did that feel bad? And then you go
Yeah.
back and you're like, oh, I've been expecting this of myself and I didn't even realize it. And the same thing happens with like jobs, like sometimes I'm sure most of us have had that experience where we do something and all of a sudden our manager's mad at us and they're like, you didn't do this. And I'm like, well, yeah, but you never told me to do that. And you're
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah. And then sometimes they don't respond well to that. But the ones that do and manage authority well, they'll be like, you're totally right. I did not communicate that to you. So I cannot expect that of you.
Mm-hmm.
But going forward, this is the expectation. And now it's been communicated. So anyway, you have you have to communicate expectations, and then they also have to be reasonable, right? They have to be manageable, like achievable. Um, but when those things are not, those two conditions are not met, um, then the responsibility is on the person who holds the expectation, right? Like
Yeah.
if you're holding an unreasonable expectation, that you're responsible for that conflict
Mm-hmm.
that's happening, right? And you have to go interrogate the reasonability of that or whatever. But if you have communicated expectations and they're reasonable, then the person who did not meet the expectations is responsible for that
Mm-hmm.
conflict.
Yeah.
Now, I say all this
Yeah.
to set up for where I'm going with this, which is that unmet expectations are the source of all conflict, but they're also the source of a couple of other human experiences that we have, one of which is comedy. So when we have an expectation and we're expecting one thing and then it gets diverted in a fun way, that's what makes us laugh, right? We just go, oh, that's hilarious, right? A great comedian, the whole point of the setup of a joke is to make you expect one thing and then they surprise you by going a different direction. And that is the root of comedy. And additionally, that same thing is the root of hospitality, where we have one expectation of service, of like getting these certain things in this moment. This person doesn't owe me anything, and then bam, you
Mm-hmm.
get surprised in a positive direction.
Mm-hmm.
Something happens that shouldn't happen or doesn't normally happen. There are so many great examples of this, but Will Gadara shares one in his book Unreasonable Hospitality, where he's talking about how he runs a restaurant and he had some guests that were in his dining room and they were on a culinary tour of New York and he just overheard them mentioning that they had been to all these great restaurants, but the only thing that they hadn't yet had was a hot dog off the street.
Mm-hmm.
And so he decides to leave his restaurant, go down to a hot dog cart, and get a hot dog for them and bring it to them because they did not have enough time to do that before their plane left. And so he's in this fine dining restaurant and he delivers a hot dog to them.
Mhm.
And that is the moment where like that expectation
Mhm.
was never there. That's
Mhm.
that is an unreasonable expectation for them to have, but
Mhm.
he was able to meet that unreasonable expectation in a way that just surprised them
Mhm.
with joy.
Yeah.
And that's where a lot of hospitality can start to really sing is by
Yes.
being able to do that. Now, there are a number of realities around this, and this is something as a business coach, I talk with people all the time about is that you can't do those things without margin, right? And so you have to charge like money above
Mhm.
what you would normally would to be able to pull off stuff like that. And you
Mhm.
have to have a culture that encourages that. And there's a variety of things there, but those moments, if you're
Mhm.
looking for how do I improve hospitality in my business,
Mhm.
look for those moments where you can surprise people's expectations.
Yep.
In a practical sense, like this is where, like if you're running an online e-commerce business, right? That is such a sort of somewhat faceless experience for
Mhm.
so many of us, where it's just like I just went to a website, I clicked order, and I paid, and then it's going to get shipped to my house, right? If I'm running an e-commerce business, I want to put as many human touch points as
Mhm.
humanly possible in that experience. I want to connect with people, and I want them to be known. And my favorite online retailer is called Sweetwater. They're a
Mhm.
music supply company,
Mhm.
and they have dominated the music space because every single person who places an order with them gets a Sweetwater rep, which is a person who is responsible for caring about that
Mhm.
individual. So you'll get an email from them um, asking how everything was and if you need anything.
Mhm.
And they will also let you know when they have certain deals coming up that are not, going to be on their website. They're very, very diligent about making those human connections. And this
Mhm.
is an entirely online business,
Mhm.
and it's so pervasive and so known that there's a whole bunch of memes about the like relationship that people have with their Sweetwater rep of
Mhm.
like my best man, like my Sweetwater rep, or like I invited them out for dinner, or my like they're going to give my elegy at my funeral.
Mhm.
And so it's just like that because they have made an effort to create hospitality moments within their e-commerce business. They've become known as just having excellent. They People would say they have excellent customer service, but in reality, they have excellent hospitality
Yeah.
because they go above and beyond what you would expect from a normal online.
Mhm. Yeah, the language in my old handbook I made at Loyal Coffee when I used to run that was that that hospitality was when we would surprise people with humanity.
Mm.
So for us, the hospitality was not the giving them the coffee, it was remembering their kid's soccer game or, whatever the thing is, that hospitality happened when when they were surprised with humanity, not
Okay.
just the service. And I think, to just even say that, like you mentioned the hot dog, but like the way this also translates, it's like as a husband or a father, like being a hospitable dad or husband is not like helping pay the bills and keeping the house clean. Like that's service. Like according to like Danny Myers, like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
um, but the hospitality is bringing flowers home when I don't have to. It's that surprise of delight. It's that surprise of humanity. Oh, I see you beyond the foundational things that make this family unit, that make this business exist. It's that surprise. It's that little bit of extra
Yep.
that really makes it what it is. Um, so Maxwell, you've learned a lot of this by way of practice. You have engaged in the industry in some beautiful ways. You at one point left working at a coffee shop and started your own company. You chased your dreams. You have, you really did make a dream come true in starting Narrative Coffee, in starting your coffee company. Maybe just encourage, or would you be willing to speak into someone who says, listen, like, like for both of us, it's like starting a coffee company when you are a barista is like the amount of debt me and my partners were in when we started, like nobody owned a house, nobody, only one of us owned a car. Like most of us, like we didn't have, and yet we were able to make it happen. You were just a barista, you were able to make this happen. The leaps to like making our dreams come true are presumably impossible. And when anybody has a dream, it feels that way at first. Could you just give us maybe a little bit of a pep talk or a little bit of a window into what could that look like, man? Somebody has a dream. They want to open a cafe. They want to start the clothing line. They want to move across the country. They want to do whatever, start a band. I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
what is your window into that?
Man, what a big question. There, I can't tell you what your journey's going to look like.
Mhm.
But what I can tell you is some things that have helped me along my journey. And there've been a couple of phrases that have really, really helped me. And both of them I happen to learn from you pastors, but I don't think either of them are necessarily like Christian spiritual exclusive or anything like that. But the first one is that it's easier to turn a moving boat than a still one,
Mhm.
which is that like sometimes if we can be paralyzed by fear of going the wrong way, of doing the wrong thing, and it can sort of paralyze us to inaction. And reminding and remembering that it's much easier for a boat to turn when it's actually moving and already has some momentum and to change directions.
Mhm.
And so it's okay to just start doing something. And if it's not the right direction, you'll figure it out and you can go the other way. And there's nothing wrong with that. But that movement and doing something can sometimes be the catalyst that you need to doing things. And that can look like starting small. That can look like just doing something different than you have been doing. It doesn't have to be huge, but it can.
Mhm.
Um, Habits tend to build on themselves, and you tend to be able to stack them after you've gotten one down. And so, if you want to change the way that you're being in the world, the way that you moved about the world, start with one thing at a time. There's Jocko Willink has this famous sort of uh, saying that like if you're having a hard time feeling motivated, like start by making your bed.
Mhm.
And I did that. I
Mhm.
was like, yeah, that sounds like a good piece of advice. Like, yeah, I can get this one thing done. I'll start with that, and maybe that'll help me start to like implement new things. And so you get that down, and it's like, all right, cool. Now I make my bed.
Mhm.
Now I have to think about like all these other things that need to get done. It's like, all right, I'll add one at a time. Like
Mhm.
now, instead of being the person who lets things wait and build up, I'll just take care of cleaning in the moment, you know.
Mhm.
And so it's like, all right, cool. Now I put my dishes in the dishwasher when they're done,
Mhm.
if you have a dishwasher, or I wash them by hand as soon as I'm done. That way they don't pile up and they don't feel overwhelmed. Right? Like all those sorts of things that you can do all that sort of piece by piece, and that's okay. There's
Mhm.
nothing wrong. There's an old saying that Rome wasn't built in a day, and
Mhm.
the encouragement there is like, good stuff takes time, right? And um, and so it's okay to build things a little bit over time. Now, the other like really driving thing that's been helpful for me is don't change in the dark what's been affirmed in the light.
Mhm.
That's just the idea that when you're in the hard seasons and the hard moments when you don't know what's happening, you don't know where your money is going to come from, you don't know what's next for your life. Um,
Mhm.
if you had something that was affirmed when it was clear and when things were good, don't change
Mhm.
those things just because you feel the pressure and stress now. Stay the course. Just continue to focus on those things that were affirmed to you when it was obvious, and keep working and keep doing the things that make a
Mhm.
difference, and things will more than likely work out okay. Not always. I think both of us have experienced enough loss and enough pain to know that it doesn't always work that way,
Mhm.
but it often does. And
Yeah.
if you're making bets, it's
Mhm.
usually pretty wise to make a bet based on the thing that happens more often than not. Um, Even
Mhm.
making space for the fact that sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So I would say those are a few things. And at the end of the day, building something worthwhile usually takes friends and it takes other people
Mhm.
to help you along your way. And that's not always the case. Like we all know and love those stories of Justin Vernon going off into a cabin to write for Emma Forever Ago by himself and coming out with this beautiful piece of art that
Mhm.
changes the world. And we all have stories of Thoreau retreating off to Walden Pond and writing,
Mhm.
incredible work. But those are they tend to be outliers. And more often than not, we tend to need people along our way. And I would even suggest that those people didn't do that on their own still.
Mhm.
Like Justin Vernon probably did not learn music by himself. Pretty likely he had a teacher or somebody he looked up to. Even if he had like self-taught, like I tend to be a self-taught kind of guy,
Hmm.
but the reality is none of that's by myself, right? Like I just learn from the resources that other people made available
Yeah.
without a direct person sort of like guiding me along that path every single moment. But there are tons of people who have spoken into that,
Hmm.
and so it's a good thing to encourage and invite others to join you in your journey of building something good.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. If in short, that I've never heard that metaphor of the boat before, and it's just you. None of this will happen if you're not moving.
Yep.
None of it will happen if you're not moving.
Yep.
Maxwell, I'm just so thankful for our time. I feel like we could talk about so much more.
For sure.
And I look forward maybe to another time to talk a little bit more about this. But I'd love to I'd love to just wrap up our time maybe today and just hear a little bit about some of the ways in which you've taken some of this wisdom, some of these teachings of Jesus into the way you express hospitality, your passion for working on yourself and saying, how can I do this thing one step better than last week or than the day before? Um, how do we cultivate um, chasings of dreams and things? You not only started a company, but then you left it. You took a big risk and you chased some more beauty in your life, right? After starting and growing and building out this great project. You actually recently just shared about a giant health journey you went on. Um, you are someone who has not only made this manifest to just sort of in theory, but in your personal life, like even so personal to your own body and your own physical health. Could you just let us into the personal ways in which this has been made manifest for you? And maybe for someone who's looking to change their own life. Maybe it is losing some weight. Maybe it is, hey, I need to quit. I need to leave something, which is a crazy endeavor to take on. How can we turn this inward when it comes to transforming our own life? And how would you coach or guide someone who's looking to make a big change, take a big risk, evolve their life in a positive way?
Yeah. Man, such a great question. Um, I think a lot of times for me, it looks like trying to understand what values you have. And
Mhm.
this is something that I encourage everybody to do whenever they're building a business, which is to say, like, what problem do you want to solve in the world? Like, what is it that you're trying to do? Um, and why? Like, and it has to be something that matters so much to you that you're willing to like. It has to be a hill you're willing to die on. You
Mhm.
know that like this matters. And like for me, hospitality is a hill, and I am willing to die.
Mhm.
Right. And so but it has to be something that just really matters to you. And within that, then that allows you to sort of make a plan and start to figure stuff out. And there's a balance point to over planning and under planning. But I tend
Mhm.
to be someone that I at least like to have a plan as much as possible. And so I would encourage folks to consider working backward, like start begin with the ending in mind,
Mhm.
and try to solve a problem or fix something in the world. And if you're struggling with aimlessness, of feeling purposeless, and like you don't have something to care about, that's a really common feeling and something that I've been there. And my encouragement to people who are stuck in that spot of feeling stuck and they just can't find a purpose is to just look for ways to help. Just
Mhm.
find something to help. And sometimes that can be one of the easiest things is to find out what pisses you off in the world,
Mhm.
what just really upsets you. One
Mhm.
something that's wrong, like sometimes that can be mistreatment of animals. Sometimes it can be a humanitarian issue.
Mhm.
It can be any number of things. But if you find something that really upsets you and you're struggling to figure out what to do with your life, go
Mhm.
help. Go help that problem. And a lot of times you'll find passion
Yes.
hidden in there. And but when you have that thing that helps to motivate and encourage you, then it's sort of building a roadmap that gets you to the world that you want to build and
Mhm.
make a difference in, and how you're going to affect that change. And so if it's your personal health, right? You have to find your why. You have to
Hmm.
care enough to make changes.
Hmm.
And it has to be real, right? Like for me, I knew the steps that I would need to take to change my health outcomes.
Hmm.
But it wasn't until I was like, man, I'm going to end up where I'm not going to know my grandkids because I'm going to die of a heart attack early. And like, I don't want that for my kids, and I don't want that for their kids. I want to be around. I
Hmm.
want to be helpful and make a difference in their world. It's not until I have that that I'm willing to like do all this stuff, you know. And it's like, yeah, I know all the steps of calories in and like workout and all that stuff. But it's like it's just not real to me until I've like really just decided like I need to change this because I'm on
Yep.
a path that's just not sustainable.
Yep.
Uh, and so that would be one piece of encouragement is to get your why first and then develop a plan, and start small. You don't have to start by doing everything to its fullest extent. Like for me with my health journey, for example, it's like I started by just going to the gym and
Hmm.
like I'm going to do this 3 days a week and I'm only going to be there for an hour at a time. So that's 3 hours a week that I'm going to commit to this.
Hmm.
It's not a ton of time, but it's enough to start feeling some change. And by starting doing that, I was like, oh yeah, I enjoy this. I actually feel better whenever I do this, and it
Hmm.
helps me feel more alive and like feel good.
Yeah.
And then from there, it's like, all right, cool. Now I can add another habit. Like, I got to start tracking all these calories because I'm clearly eating more of them than I should be. Otherwise, I'd be losing weight, and I don't know what it is yet. So I got to figure that out. And it's like, oh, it's peanut butter and trail mix 9 times out of 10.
Hmm. Hmm.
Healthy
Hmm.
food, right? Like
Hmm.
healthy whole foods, but
Hmm.
they're just calorie dense, and you know, uh, so it
Yeah.
just like contributes more than I was aware of, and so by measuring it, I was able to manage it. So those are a few things toward like chasing your dream, and then it's okay to start small and invite others into your process too. And but at the end of the day, the risk component of things can't help you feel okay with it. But I think what happens when we evaluate risks is we don't evaluate the risk of inaction.
Hmm.
And if we actually consider the risk of inaction, I think it helps us understand the true cost of a risk a little bit more. And one of the things that we do with our coaching, so like we're a consulting firm, but we're also like a half coaching business, just because, as you know, like leading a company also is a deeply personal experience, and sometimes the like personal shortcomings will work themselves out into businesses oftentimes. And so to help folks improve their businesses, often we have to help them like gain personal productivity things and things like that. But we offer as a side project sort of workshops. And one of them is called Life on Purpose. And within that, we go through an exercise where we encourage people to write a eulogy for themselves of
Hmm.
like, hey, at the end of your life, what do you want people to have said about you?
Hmm.
And then we also ask them to write an anti eulogy, which is at the end of your life, what is it that you hope that people do not say?
Hmm.
What 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 scares you the most about your life? And it's a really challenging thing, and that particular one makes people feel really uncomfortable. But for some folks, that's like a really helpful exercise
Yep.
that just helps them to evaluate the risks of doing nothing, evaluate the risks of inaction.
Yeah.
And for me, like when it comes to health, like that's a real risk of inaction. Like, do I want to be dead at 40 from a heart attack, leaving my kids to have to fend for themselves? No, that's not the world that I want.
Hmm.
And so I think that those can be really helpful moments when you're scared of the risk, right? Because I tend to be a little bit of a risk averse person, which is crazy because I've started a business and I do some risky things, but I tend to really calculate them
Hmm.
pretty heavily before I make the jump. And without doing it, without including the risk of inaction, it can make it feel like the only risk is to do something, but there is a risk in not doing things.
Yes.
And so that helps me evaluate the true cost of something.
Dang, dude. That's so good. Maxwell, this has been a blast. I am just so thankful for this opportunity and for everything that you shared with us today. Where can people find you? Where can they support you? Um Yeah, where could people connect with you?
Thanks, man. Yeah, if you want to talk coffee business or food and beverage business, I work with folks. And if you're interested in services, it would be Maxwell Threadbare. But if you just want to follow along and just be friends and homies, I'd love that too. You can just find me at Maxwell A Mooney on most platforms, Instagram and Threads and Facebook and such.
Love it. Great. And I'll of course link all of that down below. His name is Maxwell Mooney. He is just a friend, a hospitable, kind, gentle, stud, and wonderful human being. It's been an honor to host you, bro. And I can't wait to connect soon.
Always all my man.
All right. Peace.